Welcome to the crossroads of reality and the unexplained. Paranormal M invites you to join us on this quest for truth. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss a moment of our mind-boggling investigations and encounters with the supernatural. Weird stuff happening in my son's room. So since yesterday, I've seen some weird things happening in my son's bedroom. Most prominent was when my husband was putting him to sleep last night. I was laying in my living room browsing the phone, and I heard a knock on his bedroom door. And when I looked up, I saw the doorknob turning. Thinking my husband is asking me to come to the room, I opened the door and saw my husband rocking him to sleep on the bed. Nowhere close to the door. I asked him if he had knocked on the door, and he said that he thought I knocked on the door from the outside, as he heard the knock too. We thought, okay, whatever, let's not think too much about it. Once he came out, he told me it's a little bit weird because the cupboard doors keep opening themselves. I've seen it too in the past, but never paid much attention. Later at night, around 12-ish, we saw on camera that our son was restless, so my husband came in to settle him and then called me. The room had a burnt smell. Not burnt like ashes, sort of, and it was a little hazy, like smokish. I opened the door to the balcony to check if someone was burning some waste outside, but that was all clear. No smell outside. We moved him to a different room. In the past, there's also been instances of me seeing shadows on camera, but ignoring it as light. The baby just woke up screaming and then crying inconsolably. We're both non-believers, so I'm sure that there is a logical explanation to all these instances. Would love to hear them to put my mind at ease, but would also like to hear things so I can sort of make the vibes better at home. Finally getting to share this. This happened in the summer of 2007. It was told by me that the two girls who experienced it, who were friends of mine at the time, and also a couple. This is important for later. It all happened in central Italy, in Lazio, the region where Rome is. And I need to give some context about this. The area around Rome is full of hills. Most of that region is, and underneath many of these hills sit ancient Roman / pre-Christian catacombs. So many, in fact, that they're not even that big of a deal for the locals, and some of these catacombs even got converted into wine cellars or basements over the centuries. Some haven't. Again, this is important for later. Now, these two girls, we'll call them E and C, were in their early 20s, had been together for a year or so back then, and given how ludicrously expensive rents in Rome are, decided to try their luck finding a flat in one of the small towns around that area. On those hills I've mentioned. Mind you, those hills aren't ominous at all. If you've ever seen pictures of Tuscany, that's what they look like, which is rather lovely. And they did find a small apartment for rent in one of those towns. A renovated flat on the second floor of a much older house, which isn't surprising at all in that region, as many houses are centuries old and just get renovated from time to time. On the ground floor of that apartment, there were some neighbors, but they never got to see too much of them. A couple of apartments with old people living in them. There was also a very old, sturdy wooden door, which was always closed and locked by a padlock. And when they asked the landlord where it led to, he told them that it was a door to some old cellar nobody really used anymore, and supposedly was connected to one of the catacombs I've mentioned earlier. Again, it's an ancient country, and such things don't come across as particularly weird to us. Neither it did to E or C, who just shrugged it off like, okay, makes sense. So E and C spent a few months in that town, not really bonding with anyone, mainly commuting from there to Rome and back to work. C and E both study. However, being a homosexual couple in an old town full of old and bigoted people, they quickly started noticing how unwelcome they really were there. They'd go to the local store to buy food, and the clerk would ignore them on purpose. They'd find their mailbox emptied of all of their mail scattered over the floor outside their apartment. They'd even bump into people riding scooters around town, passing them and yelling, "Goddamn lesbians." In short, they didn't have the best time there, but they knew it was only a temporary solution, so they decided to just endure it while all the waiting to move again. And yes, FYI, Italy is still majorly conservative on the topic of LGBTQ, even more so now than 16 years ago. Then one morning, as she was stepping outside to go to the car to drive to Rome, E found something on the ground floor right in front of the flat's door. A mussel shell had been placed there, with a doused red candle in it. And judging by the mess it made and how short the candle was by now, it had been burning for the whole night. Not knowing what to do with it, she picked up the shell of the candle and threw it in the garbage, together with all the wax that she could scoop up from the floor. Another thing she noticed when she finally set out to leave was that the door, the sturdy wooden door downstairs that had always been closed up to that point, wasn't locked anymore. The padlock was gone, and it was opened just by a crack, but she didn't really pay too much attention to it right then. But then things started happening. At first, it was an uneasy feeling E and C would be when they were in their living room sitting on the couch, reading, chatting, watching a movie, and suddenly they'd have this feeling like someone was watching them. Later on, it became more than that. They'd hear noises around the house, like someone knocking on the walls in another room, or a toilet flushing on its own, water taps turning on by themselves in the kitchen. Quickly, it became less than bearable. One night, as they were sleeping, they both woke up in the middle of the night hearing footsteps of bare feet in the living room. They started listening. It felt like the footsteps were simply pacing around. There was nothing else, no voices, no items being moved, just the sound of bare feet in their living room. After a while, C, feeling understandably scared, whispered, "What's that?" to E, and as she did, the footsteps stopped, as if noticing her voice in the silence of the apartment. They stopped, and a split second later, they started sprinting toward their bedroom. E grabbed C and turned her face away from the door, doing so herself, just moments before the footsteps came through their bedroom's door and stopped to the side of the bed. "Don't look. Whatever happens now, don't look," E told C, and held her in her arms for the rest of the night. Neither of them sleeping, just listening in for those footsteps to finally leave, or whoever it was to do something, anything at all. But nothing happened. They spent the next 3 hours wide awake in silence until dawn came, and with that bit of sunlight finally shining through, E found the courage to turn around, and nothing was there. Another night, E, who was in university at the time, was up late studying in their living room as C was sleeping. Like I said before, it was summer, and the window in the living room was open. She wasn't facing it. The window was to her left as she was sitting at the table taking notes. Suddenly, she felt the hair on the back of her head stand and had that familiar feeling of being watched. So, she instinctively turned to the window. She described what she saw as a completely pitch-black human-like figure perched on the windowsill, with no features on its face, save for the two very large orange glowing eyes, who just stood there, motionless and staring at me. She couldn't tell me for how long she stared at it. She told me she felt completely paralyzed and helpless, and had the feeling that she had tried to move or do anything that thing would have lunged at her. Eventually, she couldn't hold it anymore, turned around and closed her eyes, took a long, deep breath, and looked again, and it was gone. After that, they contacted their landlord and decided to leave for good. They did so within a week since that event. The last thing he noticed as they were finishing packing their things up and leaving was that big wooden door, the one who had been left open ever since all those events had begun, was now once again closed and locked shut with a padlock. I hope you enjoyed. It's been 14 years since I was told all this. And ever since then, I've never sort of shared any of these conversations, but with a few trusted friends. I've been meaning to write it down eventually, but never got around to it. And no, sadly, I don't know the name of the town where this all happened. I'm not in touch with E or C anymore, so I couldn't find out more even if I wanted to. But knowing myself and what a massive dumbass I can be, I don't much mind not knowing, because I know I'd be tempted to go and take a look for myself, and that doesn't sound like it would lead anywhere constructive. Ask Reddit. When I was a child, I had a lot of trouble sleeping. My house was always in chaos. We had a really cool house designed by an architect, built into the side of a mountain. It had floor-to-ceiling windows. It could be very creepy being in the living room late at night with all the windows. Some nights, I'd wake and smell bacon and eggs at like 3 a.m. I would hear noises in the kitchen. So, I would go to the kitchen. There was a built breakfast nook. Sitting at that nook was my mother fully dressed. Dress, stockings, full makeup, hair done, like she was going out. There was a full breakfast, eggs, bacon, hash browns, and grapefruit. 2 plates were set opposite each other. There sat my mom engaged in full conversation. There was just one problem. There was no one sitting on the opposite side of my mother. She talked and laughed with the imaginary person and smoked cigarettes. This went on for hours. I spent the night at my friend's house, and being awake, I went to look in the kitchen. No mom talking to her imaginary friend. When I got home, I asked my dad about it, and he told me that it had started after the death of my brother. I lost an older sister to pneumonia and my younger brother of SIDS. I guess my mom was already struggling with mental health issues, and she just cracked right down the center. It was a scary childhood. Mental health is a terrible scourge. I sometimes think that it can be worse than cancer. My mother had both the physical and the mental issues, but the mental issues were worse. She's at peace now with my brother and my sister. Ask Reddit. When I was around 16, my rapidly growing family finally moved from the house I had spent my entire life in. As you would expect, we spent a lot of our time fondly remembering things that we used to do in the house as we were packing everything up. At some point, I decided to go into the downstairs closet with a flashlight and read. Sometimes I used to do this when I was younger to get some peace and quiet. Now, this is one of those deep closets that goes underneath the stairs. It went back around 8 feet and then had a left turn into a very low, maybe 3-foot-high space. This space was largely occupied by a mountain of old blankets and stuffed animals. Of course, this is the most fluffy spot to sit and read. After an hour in, I shift a little to get comfortable, and I hear a low, slow, warped, hoarse voice saying, "You always make me happy." I flipped my shit, hit my head on the low ceiling, and practically broke down the door getting out. After hyperventilating and explaining to my family why there was no color left in my face, I went back to see what it was. It was my stuffed little bear from when I was 3 or 4 years old that happened to lean on it just right to press his belly. When I pressed his stomach again, nothing. This poor bear I hadn't played with since I was a toddler used the last of its power, used its dying breath to tell me I made it happy. You make me happy too, little bear, when you're not making me piss myself. Ask Reddit. I believe I was visited by an angel some years ago. I was out with my college class, collecting water samples in the local river for viewing. Within 2 minutes of getting the water, I fell and got soaked in temperatures of 25 degrees. The water was slightly icy. I brushed it off, then fell again, and then a third time. I gave up, walking back to the group to mix some chemicals or whatever. After an hour, the teacher noticed how soaked I was and offered to let me leave early with another group to go back to campus, a quarter mile away. And that was via car, so I could get in a warm shower. I refused, and a few minutes later, I was asked to refill a pitcher in the river. The bank was muddy, and I fell in, getting even more soaked, and now I had mud all over me because I took my waders off. I walked back at once, threw my hands in the air, and got in the car. I heard sirens in the shower. When I got back, I was told that someone was hit on the road that we were working by. Later, I learned a group mate of mine was hit and killed by a car. I don't blame the guy. He was on the way to the hospital for his wife who had cancer and was just driving a tiny bit fast. The person who was hit, Bird, was walking slightly ahead of the group. If the others had been walking at his pace, everyone and the teacher would have been hit. If I had been walking with the group, I would have likely been walking alongside Bird. He and I walk at the same pace. We were next to each other on the way to the river. We would have likely talked together on the way back. I truly believe that someone up there wanted me to live. I'm normally clumsy, yes, but not like this. I kept tripping over literal air and went underwater when I shouldn't have. I'm good at keeping my head up when I fall. I just question why me and why Bird couldn't have been saved as well. Ask Reddit. Last year, I once woke up thinking, he's here, convinced there was someone standing next to my bed. I was so scared and didn't dare to open my eyes for what seemed like an hour. When I was around 13, there was a moment I saw an elderly couple outside my window while I was undressing. I gave them the finger thinking that they were pervs, but the next moment, they were gone. It was also not the right height for people to stand at. They must have been 2.5 meters tall for them to be at that place. My friend and I tried making animals with light and shadow hands, and suddenly there was this tiny man. I told my friend, "Wow, you're amazing. How are you doing that?" When she answered, "Oh my God, I didn't. I thought that was you." The thing started running towards us. We both hid underneath the blankets. My dad opened the door, so no idea what that would have happened. And last but not least, we had a terrible car accident once where my dad crushed in another car and we couldn't have fallen down a ravine, but luckily we didn't. Also, from 2 families, there were only some light injuries, although both cars were totally wrecked. Years later, my dad told me that he believes he has a guardian angel because on that day, the police and himself found something like a handprint trying to keep the car from falling down there. doppelganger. I had my first encounter with a doppelganger 2 weeks ago. I convinced myself that it was just in my head. Must have been a waking dream of sorts. Me and my boyfriend went out. I myself had only 2 beers over 5.5 hours that we were out, so I'm not even buzzed. I was in my kitchen waiting for my dog to finish his business so I can lock up and go to bed when I see movement to my right. To put this in context, my kitchen is a rectangle with my family room on my left, and my living room would be behind me, and my master bedroom off to that to the right. And to the right of my kitchen is a laundry room, open floor plan. Okay, back to the moment on my right. I turned, confused, because I thought my boyfriend had went into the bedroom to start getting things ready for bed, when I see him in the doorway to the laundry room smiling at me. Then he did a 180 very dramatically, took a step forward, and proceeded to comically walk behind the wall in the laundry room. Monty Python's Flying Circus Ministry of Silly Walks bit is the closest thing that I can have to describe how he walked away. Me, confused, followed asking him what he was smoking. There was no one there. There's no way out of the laundry room. One way in, one way out. Then it came back this morning, and this time my dog reacted. It showed up again in my bedroom doorway, smiling, and gestured for me to follow. I was 100% sure my boyfriend was outside getting our vehicle started for work. My dog freaked out and got between it and myself, and he was pissed. And when I looked down at him and tried to grab him because, shit, I don't know what the hell it is, but I don't want my dog to get hurt, it was gone. I looked in my bedroom, my closet, and my attached bathroom. Nothing. There's no other way out that it could have walked through. It'd have to go through me to get through, just to get away at all. What did I see? Someone help me figure this out. Situation number 1. I was at my grandma's house in the upstairs bedroom. It's a 4-bedroom old house on the country, and I'm laying in bed watching Netflix on my phone on a nightstand. There's a door to my grandma's bedroom that's catty-corner to the open door in the room that I'm sleeping in. So I'm laying there watching Forensic Files, and so my view is kind of distorted from the light on the screen, but I see a black figure walk up and grab the doorknob of the door to the other bedroom. And it just stands there. I'm thinking it's my grandma who's downstairs. She's kind of hard of hearing, so I say "Grandma" a few times, louder and louder until the hair stands up on the back of my neck, and I lean up in bed and say "Grandma" really loud. At this point, whatever it is knows I'm looking at it and replies to me, "Oh, you can see me?" and turns around and walks away, bro. I didn't know what to do. I sat there for a minute and then got up and looked through all the other bedrooms, and nobody was up there. I go downstairs and my grandma's sitting there watching Jeopardy like usual. I asked her if she went upstairs. She said no, has no idea what I'm talking about. I'm not schizophrenic that I know of, and I was completely sober. Freaked the out of me. Situation number 2. Fast forward 6 months and it's New Year's. Long story short, I'm laying in the other bedroom. That was catty-corner to the one that I was in the first time in that story. And out of sleep and crazy hungover. I hear a woman mumbling down the hallway by the bathroom. Hallway and the bathroom in the same big bedroom. I don't think anything of it. Maybe somebody stopped over and I was hearing them downstairs. There is a balcony in the bedroom that I'm at and a patio out front on the bottom level. I laid there for a little while listening to it, but I couldn't make any words out. So I go downstairs and ask my mom and my grandma, who are both sitting downstairs on each other end of the house, in the living room watching TV if there's anybody there. My mom said no. I told her I heard some lady upstairs mumbling. She just said no one was there. So I went back upstairs and tried to get some sleep. As soon as I'm barely asleep, I'm laying on my right side and I hear a scream from a girl less than 3 inches from my left ear. I was so scared I jumped up and ran into the door, then opened it and ran out. Fast forward again to later that night, and my mom's spending the night at my apartment. She doesn't live in town, she was visiting. My mom said that she hears the lady too some mornings mumbling down the hallway, but she can never make out what it's saying. She just didn't want to say anything in front of my grandmother to freak her out. My grandma doesn't believe in ghosts. What the fuck, bro? I refuse to sleep over there anymore. Hell no. Any ideas on what I heard or saw? The house was built by my grandfather and his first wife who lived there. They had a young daughter who died of some blood disease. I'm not sure what happened, or if it's curable. But I get some super weird, anxious vibes from that house. I bought an audio recorder and set it up there 3 days. I went through all the audio recordings on my girlfriend's laptop, but I can't hear anything except for some interference every now and then. But it might just be the audio recorder. Large dog creature in Florida. Let me say first and foremost, I'm a man of logic and explanation. I never believed in ghosts or other cryptic beings really in my life, but something happened the other night that really made me feel weird. So I live somewhere in between country and town here in Florida, and I see an abundance of wildlife. Foxes, coyotes, raccoons, all very normal to see. Since there's a pretty large fox population around here and most people having chickens, everyone has large dogs, including me. I have a 70-pound boy and a 60-pound girl pit bull. They're fearless. They know this is their property and they protect it as such, alerting me if they hear something. And if they do, I open the door and they run out to chase whatever it is. The other night, I woke up randomly, and it was disturbingly quiet outside, like not a single cricket, and my dogs were not on the bed like they usually are. All of a sudden, a howl like I've never heard went off like a siren that sent a chill running down my spine, like a deep yell almost, but definitely from an animal. I turned the lights on in my house to see my pit bulls at the back of their crate shaking. I've never seen that look on my dog's face like that before. Purely terrified. So I turned all the lights back off, grabbed a flashlight, and looked out my back window. What I saw about 200 yards off by the tree line near the back of my property was a dog thing. I vaguely saw it, but it was very similar to a hyena in build, with a large amount of fur on its neck, like a mane, almost skinny back legs. Its head looked very wolf-like, with erect ears and a large skull. It was fucking huge. It was so black it was hard to make out distinct characteristics, but its presence scared basically any living thing that was around, it seemed, that night. The next morning I went to the spot I saw the animal, but saw no tracks or hair or anything. But I know what I saw. I never saw anything like it before. Has anyone in Florida seen anything like this? We've been having a lot of dead dogs in the area. Dogs that are large and are being killed by something. Other people think it's coyotes or a feral dog, but I think it's that thing I saw. Just seeing my dog so terrified really scared me. Ask Reddit. In my senior year of high school, I was stuck in writing class with all grades for a semester. I was sat next to a group of rather loud freshmen, much to my dismay, and despite trying to remain as recluse as possible, one of the freshman girls would occasionally try and chat me up. Because of my grumpy nature, she began calling me Grandpa affectionately, and only she and the group would bother to talk to me. We definitely weren't friends. She was just too loud and bubbly for me. But even as the semester ended, we changed classes, we passed each other every morning on our way to first period, and she would always call out, "Hey, Grandpa," as she passed me with her group of friends that she walked with every day. In late March, it began to buzz around the school that a freshman had committed suicide. It was said to the upperclassmen, but we never dwelled on it, because beyond hearing about the suicide prevention assembly freshmen were required to attend, it never affected us. In mid-April, I was running late to my first period, and this particular day stuck out to me, because I had actually done my first period homework, which I never did. And if you showed up late, any work turned in wasn't credited. As I was running down the hall, I saw the freshman girl alone and leaning against the wall. She looked at me and said, "Hey, Grandpa," in a very sad voice. I quickly said hi and ran off to class without another thought. Fast forward to my last band concert of the year, and the final song was sung by the choir, in dedication for the fallen freshman who had just been in the group. I glanced down at the program to see what song they were singing, and for the first time ever, I saw the freshman's name. It was the girl. I was immediately frozen stiff, much to my bandmates' confusion, and asked if it was a misprint. Nope, it was her name. I looked up her death date in the obituary, and it was March, but I'd seen her in April, alone, and so sad looking. I cried on my walk home after the concert, and still to this day, I have no homework that I did. This says, I have 2 homework I did that was never credited in April, because I ran late. Ask Reddit. Damn, 8 comments. Hopefully this gets attention. My mom told me about a story. I don't remember, as I was too young. She was bathing me in a trailer home that she had back then, and I asked her, "Mommy, who's that man behind you?" And no one was there. She also told me there was a rocking chair that rocked by itself. Another time I was staying the night at my cousin's and grandparents' place, and I woke up in the middle of the night to what sounded like multiple people talking in the next room. I don't think it was too weird until I asked my cousin about it years later, and he said that he had woke up to that too that night and didn't recognize the voices. I heard a man talking one night about his regrets and stuff like that, when my mom and my dad were both asleep next to me. It was a sort of a wake-up, hear weird things, think nothing of it, then go back to sleep type thing. I was very young. It was at a new apartment, first night there. Those apartments are right next to the cemetery. I had the same nightmare the whole time I lived there. I still remember it very clearly. My buddy and I were up to no good one summer. For some reason, I really wanted to rob a house. I was a bad kid. Anyway, after we broke a window or got some other hood rat shit, we went and run over back to his house. On the way there is a big mansion, about 2 or 3 acres of land, in a weird spot, really. It was behind a convenience store in a residential area in one of the bad parts of town. Anyway, we were running to his house, and we were passing this mansion in a field. We saw what looked like a woman in a long white dress keeping pace with us, but not in a running pose, and we couldn't see her feet. She was floating at the speed that we were running. We got back to his house, and I asked if he saw it. He said yes, and that was that. Never saw it again. What was a time you truly couldn't explain something, whether it was paranormal or not? For me, it happened when I was probably 14, so probably back in 2009-ish. I was sleeping over at my cousin's house, where I think we honestly haunted his house from all using a Ouija board. We were laying on their couches in their living room trying to fall asleep around 2 or 3 a.m. It was dead silent other than a fan running to cool the house down since it was summertime. And out of nowhere, we all hear the loudest sound we've ever heard before. It sounded like the entire universe was collapsing into itself right in his living room and only lasted for a second or two. We instantly sat up and asked each other if all three of us heard that noise. And we did. We were asking each other what it could have been when his dad comes running down the stairs into the living room and asks us what it was. Us having no idea, we just said we don't know. It just woke us all up. His dad didn't believe us, and we started semi-laughing because it scared us so badly. He then accuses us some more. Then we laugh at him because none of us genuinely did it. He was starting to sound like a crazy person. Eventually, he went back upstairs to go to bed, and we eventually fell asleep too. To this day, me and my cousins still have no idea what it could have been. My only theory was that the house was settling on its foundation or something, even though it was only built in the mid-90s. Ouija board I buried over 16 years ago. When I was a young teen, I stole a Ouija board from Spencer's and played around with it a couple times with a couple of friends. I ended up putting it in the bottom drawer of my dresser to hide it from my parents. At some point, I'd start glancing over there while trying to sleep, feeling uncomfortable like there was some kind of presence in the drawer. I didn't really know what to do, so I took it out and just buried it by a big pine tree. I looked for it for several years later, but couldn't find it because the ivy was so overgrown. My parents have been divorced for quite a while now, and I don't live at that house anymore. I haven't talked to my dad in about 9 years, but my mom has said that he thinks his house is haunted, complaining about keys and other things disappearing or getting moved somewhere else. Not to mention a bunch of other bad or strange things that went on there. But that would really take a long time to talk about. Neither of my parents knew about the Ouija board, and they're both religious. I have an occasional strange dream about the pool back there always being absolutely filthy and scary creatures living in it. I suffer from depression and anxiety too. I wish I could go and find it and deal with it somehow, but the situation is complicated. Ask Reddit. When I was 16, my sister spent her last few days in the hospital. I remember her close friend came to pick me up from school to see my sister. At this time, I didn't know how serious my sister's condition was. But before we went to the hospital, we swung by my house so I could get some things to take. I felt uneasy, and my instinct told me something was wrong, so I just started to cry. Of course, I knew my eyes would dry out since I wore contact lenses, so I took my eye drops with me. A few days passed, it happened. My family stayed at the hospital to take care of everything, and another family friend took me home. In this time, the last person to be at my home was me. That was the day I grabbed my eye drops. On the way home, despite being the saddest I'd ever been in my life, I remember my eyes becoming painfully dry due to the crying. Then I remembered I left my eye drops on her bedside table. I remember very specifically. When I got home, the same bottle of eye drops, and I only had one bottle, was on my desk in my bedroom. This was so shocking to me, but somehow comforting, because it gave me a sense of possibility. Why do purification rituals and smudging often make paranormal activity worse? I've never had any first-hand experience with something I can blatantly account to being paranormal, but like everyone else, I've had weird experiences that certainly gave me the chills. I've been watching a lot of paranormal activity videos on YouTube for years now, and used to read a lot of stories, and on other forums about people's experiences with hauntings. I've noticed that usually whenever people try to get rid of a ghost or try to treat, quote-unquote, their haunting, they'll perform some sort of purification ritual with incense or burning some herbs. Maybe they'll use holy water or something, or often they attempt a smudging or burning of sage, and they instead seem to end up provoking the entities and ultimately make their hauntings even worse or become violent. Why do you believe this is? Could it be that they're performing rituals incorrectly? I don't know the right, quote-unquote, way to smudge a house, but I've heard that there is a correct way to do it. Personally, I think it's probably because they're focusing all their attention on the entities that are causing the haunting, and they're feeding off of the energy and the fear. I've always heard that the best thing to do when paranormal activity begins is to ignore it and pay it no mind, or rather, that one of the worst things you can do is start asking it to do things, talk to it, try to contact it, or show fear and vulnerability. I think I have an extra roommate in my house. I think my house has some sort of entity or energy co-inhabiting with my roommate and I. I recently moved into a 2-story, 3-bed duplex, 4 units in the whole building. The building is old, quiet, and unnerving. I moved in 1 month to the day and have sensed, seen, and felt some things that I can't explain. The first week of living alone, I had 2 jobs, and I was working from 10:30 a.m. until about midnight every night. But thankfully, I got out of my night job. It was after I had more time in the house that I began experiencing these things. On a Tuesday morning, I was doing my telehealth therapy on my PC when all of a sudden I heard a loud thud from my kitchen. I turned my head and my therapist acknowledged what I heard. She heard it too. She seemed really freaked out because she said a bright flash of light went over my head as soon as the bang occurred. I went into the kitchen to find my fridge open and bananas on the floor. I was pretty freaked out but tried to rationalize it to the best of my abilities, but I'm still failing to do so. I woke up the next day hoping everything was just a coincidence, but before I took a shower, I noticed 2 scratch marks and 2 fainter ones next to each scratch. I know the picture quality is bad, but I was late to work and I had to capture some evidence. There have been frequent scatters of footsteps in the creepy basement at late hours, and knocks of 3 in succession, on doors. I watched too many horror movies about this, and now it's finally my turn. Mystic Mayhem, My Priest Uncle and the Malevolent Witchcraft Box. My uncle is a priest, and something truly unexplainable happened to him. Beside the temple, there's a huge old big old ficus tree that attracts both God worshippers and practitioners of black magic and witchcraft. In our village, some witches perform their rituals in the early morning to avoid being seen. One day, as my uncle was cleaning and purifying the temple surroundings with holy water, he accidentally picked an empty box of incense sticks, mistaking it for a full one. It was near the ficus tree outside the temple. Unaware of its significance, he brought it inside the temple while performing his prayers and priestly duties. However, the moment he crossed the temple boundary on his way out, something inexplicable occurred. He was suddenly thrown to the ground and viciously attacked by an invisible entity. Although he couldn't see anyone, his body bore long nail scratches, and he seemed to have been punched under his eyes, leaving pigmented purplish-bluish marks. The injuries were severe, as if the entity showed no mercy. In his distress, my uncle managed to call for help when he spotted a villager passing by. The villager was shocked to see the terrible state my uncle was in. I eavesdropped my parents' conversation since they hide these things. So what I heard after was that our family's senior priest was summoned to examine him, and he revealed the shocking truth. It turned out that my uncle had unknowingly touched a piece of an object used in witchcraft, possessing powerful black evil energies. When he brought that box inside the temple, the evil entity within the object was in distress and became enraged. As soon as my uncle left the temple, the malevolent force attacked him with full force. This incident has left us all shaken, as it serves as a stark reminder of the unseen and powerful forces that can be present around us. My uncle is now recovering, but the experience has left us all deeply perplexed and cautious about the mysterious world beyond our comprehension. Death news and paranormal encounters. Death Newser. Back in 2020, when COVID was everywhere, my uncle got the virus and his condition was pretty bad. One day before his death, really weird things happened. Morning, as soon as I woke up, I went to open the balcony door. There's a black butterfly, and it entered, and the small creature died in front of me. That small, petite creature stopped flying and fell down. That was really odd. I felt bad. Then I blew her outside. After a while, a black bird came from our kitchen window, took a round of the kitchen, and went outside. Now it got really weird. Black butterfly, black bird. Whole day went as usual. Around 3 a.m., I slightly woke up. I don't remember the exact time, but I hear a mixed voice of many people in unison, men and women's voices together, saying to me something like, "Take care of your brother is in danger." At that moment, I was paralyzed. I don't have sleep paralysis, and I'm aware of what it is. And I couldn't open my eyes nor move. I was screaming, "Mom, Mom!" but nothing came out. I was screaming inside. I could hear my scream inside my chest. It came out, "Mom!" Finally, the third time. She came running to my room and asked what happened, and I proceeded to tell her. But I was worried about my brother. I kept checking on him if he was all right. Then the next morning, we got the news of my uncle passing away. The unknown voice from the unknown source just warned me. Am I a psychic? What was that? After a few days, his soul visited us. I was smelling like something burning and felt something in front of me, but I can't see. The next morning, my mom confirmed and told me that she felt as someone was watching her, but she told me not to worry. It must be his soul. Night Visitor. We just shifted to our new house, 2019. We had things to arrange and beds to make. We decided for now that we'll sleep on the floor, and that day, all of us woke up around 3 a.m. to drink water. My neighbor was watching a movie at a loud volume so I could hear it, and I was seriously annoyed. I wasn't able to drift back to sleep after flipping side by side for a while. I felt something strange, like someone staring at me. Someone sitting right beside me, like right now, present tense to imagine. My eyes are closed, but I could feel the strong gaze of two pairs on me. And after a while, I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like they have long hair. My eyes are closed, but I feel it. It's too close to my face. Now I'm sweating horribly. I'm fighting for my life. I opened my eyes, saw nothing but darkness. I again gulp a glass of water and try to sleep, but I can't close my eyes and drift to dreamland. Now my body's getting colder and colder, cold as ice, cold sweat running down, and my body's trembling so bad I can't stop it. I was shaking so bad, I was anxious. I had very weird feelings in my chest. I was on the verge to cry, taking deep breaths, but I can't no more. I woke my parents up and they were mad. Yeah, I asked my mom to come over to my side and sleep beside me. She scolded me, but she eventually came. I hugged her. She flinched. She held my hand and said, "Oh my God, you're cold as ice." She rubbed my hands and feet. Now my father was wide awake too. He turned the lights on and tried to calm me down. After a few minutes, as I was going to sleep, I noticed that the front door was open. We were sleeping in the living room. It was freaking open. I remember before sleeping that my dad had locked it. Now I'm in full fear, terrified. I told my dad, pointing my finger toward the door. My dad looked and lied, excuse, that he went outside to walk a bit. Then he put me back to sleep. But I was awake. How could I sleep? Then my father speaks to my mother, assuming I'm asleep, stating that he'd heard someone knocking on the door. But when he checked, no one was outside. He said that he thought it was a soul, so he locked the door. I don't know how it was open. We need to see if the lock still works, or to get a new one from the priest. That's chilling. I know how to spend that night. It seemed too long, and I was just hoping to open my eyes in the morning. By the way, the locket from the priest was for my protection. And yeah, it was a bit broken. When I was 5 or something, our family priest strictly told my parents to not let me take it off. I was maybe affected by negative energy. Whenever I asked my parents, they never told me anything. But now I'm safe from whatever it was. The false call. My mom called in for dinner. I was in my study room. As I turned the lights off, I heard mixed voices in unison saying my name, reciting my name once. But I didn't look back and had a small run to the kitchen. Did you ever experience something like that, ever? Question about what I can only describe as a demon. So years ago, me and my girlfriend at the time took a picture while laying in bed, with my niece between us and the poster behind us on the wall. We clearly caught what I can only describe as a demon staring straight down at my niece. It was clear as day, no mistaking it. It was looking through the light reflecting off the poster, like it was a window or something. Thinking we got a weird angle, clearly in denial, we recorded a video of us probably 15 to 20 seconds long to see if we still saw it. Mind you, my niece was asleep between us having nightmares for the last hour or so we kept waking her up. Anyways, in the video, right when it starts, you can see it still staring down at her, eyes bulging, looking down. About 5 seconds in, a white orb flies from behind my right shoulder toward the opposite corner of the room. As soon as it gets halfway across the bed, the thing in the poster looks up as its eyes follow the orb of light. Then the video ends. We immediately grabbed my niece, ran into the living room, and turned on all the lights, starting to read a Bible till the sun came up. This all happened at a family friend's house, so as soon as we were able to get a ride to get out of there, we did, and we never went back. I still have the phone, but it's broken. I don't know how to get any of the videos off of it without being able to turn on USB mode. The thing in the poster I looked at that night looked like the king from the Game of Thrones, except with scales all over its face. And instead of a blue color, it was like a dark blood. So dark it was almost pitch black or burnt like dark red tint to the scales, and the creepiest eyes I've ever seen. The girlfriend who was with me at the time is now my wife. We often have to ask one another what really happened because who wants to believe something like that even exists? So now to the question. Does anyone have any ideas of what it was that we encountered, based on its description and the facts? That it was causing my niece nightmares, and looking through the light bouncing off the poster. What did we see? My great-grandmother accurately predicted the destruction of her family home and save her mother's life. My grandmother told me this story about her mother. She is not at all spiritual and doesn't have any other stories like this, so it's always stood out to me. It's a little long, so please bear with me. When my great-grandmother was a child, she had frequent prophetic dreams. Usually it would be something small like receiving a letter in the mail or having a specific conversation with a friend. This friend would be in her dream, and within a few days the event would actually occur. At the time she lived with her mother, who used a wheelchair, and her grandmother. I believe that she also had siblings, but they aren't relevant to the story. Her grandmother, my great-great-great-grandmother, was supposedly a psychic medium herself. Admittingly, I have some doubts about this claim. I have to assume that her grandma didn't work as a medium professionally due to the time period, but I don't doubt that she had psychic abilities. Anyway, her grandma was very interested in these dreams and always took them seriously. One night she had a dream that was different than the rest. She dreamed that there was a terrible house fire and that they were unable to get her mother out of the home in time, due to difficulties with her wheelchair. She woke up in the middle of the night crying inconsolably. She told her grandmother about the dream, and she immediately started waking up the rest of the family, telling them to grab as much stuff as they could take with them. They hopped in the car and went to stay with a family friend for the night. The next day, they come back to check on the house, and it's just ashes, completely burned to the ground. I can't remember if they ever found the cause of the fire. As far as I know, this is the only big incident that she ever predicted. But I wonder what else went on in that family. Unfortunately, my great-grandmother passed away when I was young, so I never got the chance to ask her about this story. I've also had a few dreams like this myself. Nothing as extreme as a house fire, but still interesting. And I wish I could talk to her about them. Ask Reddit. When I was young, my family moved into, quote-unquote, the most haunted house on an Indian reservation in 2001. The whole town knew of it, and I grew up known as the kid who lives in the haunted house. We're a white family, and the house was abandoned for years before we moved in. It was apparently built on an Indian burial ground. The tribe overheard that someone bought the house and insisted on cleansing it before we moved in. The tribe's leaders and shaman showed up and started to walk into the house and just stopped. They would not enter the house. We were forced to do the ritual in the front yard. They didn't feel it was safe. We had the occasionally spooky noises, but it was an old rickety house, so we didn't think twice about it. We also always had dogs and cats to blame the unexplained noises on, Years went by, and we continued to ignore what most people would consider to be creepy or haunted, up until about a year ago, that is. The spirits must have had just enough and wanted to be heard finally. A friend of mine was down the road at a mutual friend's house and was too drunk to drive all the way home. We lived pretty far out in the country. He called me, and I insisted he sleep on my couch for the night. He showed up around 2 a.m. The whole house was asleep except for me and him. I got him some water and blankets, set him up for a nice sleeping spot on the couch, and we both went to bed. We woke up early the next morning, and he was getting ready to leave and grabbed his 400 pair of Jordan high-top retros. He started to put them on and quickly stopped, realizing there was something inside of his left shoe. He reached in and pulled out a small chunk of dog shit and a crumpled up tissue. Everyone was still asleep. No one woke up throughout the night. There were only 3 suspects: my mom, my dad, or my brother, none of which would be rude enough to do such a thing. My dogs never had a problem going to the bathroom in the house, let alone aiming perfectly into a shoe. To this day, we still don't know how it got there. The tissue made him believe someone was pulling a prank on him, but I swore on my first child that none of my family members would ever think to do something like that. We had no choice but to blame the spirits. 17 years I lived in that house, and that was the most unexplained thing that's ever happened. My friend is still convinced the house is haunted and refuses to spend the night anymore. I try to joke about it every now and then, and he gets very uneasy at the thought of it. It still bugs me that we'll never know how it happened. But at least I know my ghosts have a good sense of humor. Ask Reddit. My in-laws' former house seemed to have some odd stuff going on in it. My wife and I sold our house, and we were going to buy a house that my in-laws were living in at the time. They had another house that they were fixing up, so my wife, myself, and my oldest daughter moved into the house with my in-laws. My oldest had to share a room with me and my wife while we lived there due to my in-laws having the other bedrooms piled with junk. That would be loved once the other house was full. So she gets up to go to school one morning. My wife has already left for work. I hear my daughter say, "Scoot over, Daddy. I'm getting in your bed. I feel bad." I slightly open my eyes to see her PJs and scoot over. I trust my kid to know when she's too sick for school, and she gets in the bed. I don't go back to sleep, but I roll over to check on her, and no one's there. I sit up to look around. No kid. I text her and ask where she went. She says, school? To which I ask when. She says, "I left a while ago, my normal time." I was freaked out. A few weeks later, my wife says that she got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Said when she opened the door, there was a man in the middle of the bathroom that looked giant, and he was on fire. She was not fazed by this, as she sees stuff her entire life, but she wanted me to be aware. No big deal, right? Well, it wasn't until my daughter's in the office room with me a few days later and look into the hall toward the same bathroom and says, "Do you see the big red man over there?" I didn't see it, but that freaked me out. I had a dream my nanny went to heaven. When I woke up, I was told she passed. My nanny, aka my grandmother, passed away when I was 9. Her and I were extremely close. She was diagnosed with lung cancer and was terminal. At 9, I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew it wasn't good. Now my aunt, my nanny's daughter, passed away when she was 18. I never seen any good quality photos of her, so I never really had a good image of her face. All I know was my nanny would say her favorite color was black. I put this part in so you could understand what I'm going to be saying next. I usually slept at my nanny's house and went to school in the morning. This was a weekend, and for some reason I slept home that night. When I woke up that morning, I remember having this vivid dream. I dreamt that my nanny was floating on a cloud going up to heaven. She was so happy and excited. I then remember looking up in the dream and seeing this woman on a cloud with her arms raised, and she was wearing black. I wasn't creeped out during the dream because my nanny looked so happy. The woman's face was blurred out, and I remember trying so hard to see her face. I woke up with tears coming down mine, but I just brushed it off and headed downstairs. When I was coming down the stairs, my whole family was in the living room. My mom was crying. I asked her why she was so upset, and she unfortunately told me that my nanny passed away. I was frozen in place. I was devastated. I just lost my best friend. But I felt a sense of peace because I knew she was with her daughter again. I waited a few days before I told anybody about the dream, in fear that I would upset them. I still remember this vivid dream and the peace that comes with it. I grew up Catholic and was currently enrolled in a Catholic school, so I did believe in God and all that stuff. The only terrifying thought is that, yeah, I believe in heaven, but if there is a heaven, there must be a hell. Why aren't ghosts naked? If objects don't have quote-unquote souls or whatever, why do ghosts, when visible, wear clothing? This has always bothered me. I'm a non-believer, but I do entertain myself thinking about the logic behind the existence of ghosts. So I don't understand how ghosts appear with clothing when clothes cannot have souls. There won't be a ghost of a toilet, a door, a car. Maybe we can agree that sometimes the soul of one or multiple people can turn inanimate objects into ghost versions of them, like the ghost ships and stuff. But how does that work? They wear the thing that they died with. If a person used to wear glasses, does the ghost has its own eye problems as well? A person with Tourette's also has Tourette's as a ghost? At least this will indicate the soul of a person evolves at the same time the person grows. But what about a baby ghost or non-born kids? I've seen cases about people believing in their unborn child haunting another baby of the said person. How does the ghost look like? And more importantly, how does it think? Do we unlock full consciousness, logic, and intelligence as ghosts? Does a retarded person, sorry, can't come up with another word, not being rude or trying to offend anybody, maintain their cognitive problems as a ghost? Because that just sounds like mental torture. Also, if we know that a person's soul evolves and looks like the said person, what about people with skin issues and missing limbs? Do ghosts look like that as well? And if not, what and when does the soul decide to look like this and not look like that?